The Charge of the Light Brigade. It is one of the most famous examples of a military order gone horribly wrong. In 1854, during the Crimean War, British cavalry were ordered to charge Russian artillery positions. But due to miscommunication, the cavalry ended up charging straight into a heavily fortified line of cannons. The result was devastating. Hundreds of soldiers and horses were killed in minutes. What was meant to be a bold maneuver turned into a slaughter, immortalized in history as a symbol of bravery wasted by poor leadership. Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, began with rapid success but ultimately proved catastrophic. Hitler underestimated the sheer size of the Soviet Union, the resilience of its people, and the brutality of its winters. German forces became bogged down, supplies dwindled, and the Red Army regrouped. By 1943, the German army was in full retreat, and the failed invasion became one of the key reasons for Germany's defeat in World War II. What was planned as a swift knockout blow turned into a quagmire that destroyed the Wehrmacht. The Battle of Cannae. The Battle of Cannae, in 216 BCE, demonstrates how strategy can backfire even when executed perfectly. The Roman Republic deployed one of its largest armies ever against Hannibal of Carthage. Hannibal, however, used a brilliant double envelopment tactic, surrounding the Romans on all sides. The result was one of the bloodiest defeats in Roman history, with up to 70,000 Roman soldiers killed in a single day. The Romans expected an overwhelming victory, but their sheer numbers became a liability in a confined battlefield. The Maginot Line. The Maginot Line was France's grand defensive strategy after World War I. Stretching along the border with Germany, it was a massive system of bunkers, fortifications, and tunnels designed to make invasion impossible. But when World War II broke out, the Germans simply bypassed the Maginot Line by invading through Belgium, rendering the costly fortifications useless. What was meant to be an impregnable shield turned into a glaring weakness, as France fell in just 6 weeks. The Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive of 1968 was a bold North Vietnamese strategy during the Vietnam War. The idea was to launch massive surprise attacks across South Vietnam during the Lunar New Year, hoping to spark a popular uprising and break American morale. While the offensive initially shocked U.S. forces, it quickly failed militarily, as the Viet Cong suffered huge casualties and failed to hold territory. However, the strategy backfired in another way. It convinced the United States public that the war was unwinnable, which eventually forced America's withdrawal. It became a rare case where a failed military offensive succeeded politically. The Spanish Armada. In 1588, it was Spain's attempt to invade England and overthrow Queen Elizabeth I. The fleet was vast and powerful, but poor planning and bad weather doomed the mission. English ships used faster, more maneuverable vessels to outflank the cumbersome Armada, while storms wrecked many of Spain's ships as they retreated. Instead of cementing Spain's dominance, the defeat marked the decline of its naval supremacy. The invincible Armada became a symbol of hubris and failure. Operation Market Garden. This operation in 1944 was an ambitious Allied plan to end World War II quickly by seizing a series of bridges in the Netherlands and paving the way into Germany. Paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines, but the Germans proved far stronger than expected. The operation stalled at the final bridge in Arnhem, leading to a disastrous defeat. Thousands of Allied soldiers were killed or captured, and what was supposed to shorten the war instead prolonged it. Napoleon's invasion of Russia. In 1812, it remains one of history's greatest strategic blunders. Napoleon marched into Russia with over 600,000 men, expecting a quick victory. Instead, the Russians retreated, burning their own cities and fields in a scorched earth strategy that left the French army starving. When winter set in, disease, frostbite, and starvation decimated Napoleon's forces. Less than 100,000 men survived the retreat, and the once invincible emperor was fatally weakened. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu. It was France's attempt to trap the Viet Minh in northern Vietnam by establishing a fortified base in a valley in 1954. But the strategy disastrously backfired when the Viet Minh surrounded the French position with heavy artillery placed on surrounding hills. The French garrison was cut off, bombarded, and eventually forced to surrender. This crushing defeat ended France's colonial presence in Indochina and set the stage for American involvement in Vietnam. Gallipoli Campaign. During World War I, it was Winston Churchill's bold plan to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war by seizing the Dardanelles Strait. But poor planning, underestimated resistance, and logistical failures turned the campaign into a disaster. Allied troops faced brutal conditions, disease, and fierce Ottoman defense. After 8 months and over 250,000 casualties, the Allies retreated in defeat. Instead of weakening the Ottomans, the campaign boosted their morale and cemented Mustafa Kemal Ataturk as a national hero. The Battle of Little Bighorn. In 1876, U.S. General George Custer launched a reckless attack against a vastly larger Native American force. Expecting an easy victory, Custer split his forces and charged, only to find himself completely surrounded by warriors under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. The result was a total massacre, with Custer and all his men killed. What was supposed to be a swift triumph turned into one of the greatest humiliations in U.S. military history. Operation Eagle Claw. In 1980, this was the U.S. attempt to rescue hostages from the American embassy in Tehran. The complex mission involved helicopters, planes, and special forces, but it ended in chaos when several helicopters broke down in the desert. A collision on the ground killed 8 servicemen, and the mission was aborted. Instead of rescuing the hostages, the operation became a national embarrassment and highlighted the risks of overcomplicated planning. The Battle of Carrhae. The Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE shows how arrogance can doom even the most powerful armies. Roman general Crassus led a massive force into Parthia, expecting an easy conquest. But the Parthians used mobile horse archers and heavy cavalry to outmaneuver the Romans. Crassus was killed, his army annihilated, and Rome suffered one of its worst defeats. What was supposed to expand Roman glory ended in humiliation and disaster. The Battle of Stalingrad, though ultimately a Soviet victory, was initially part of Hitler's strategy to cripple the Soviet Union by seizing the industrial city. Instead, the Germans became bogged down in brutal urban combat. The Soviets encircled the German Sixth Army, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. Starving and freezing, the Germans eventually surrendered in early 1943. The strategy not only failed, but also marked the turning point of the entire war in favor of the Allies. The Battle of Yarmouk. It demonstrates how overconfidence can ruin an empire. The Byzantine Empire assembled a massive force to crush the invading Arab Muslim armies. But infighting, poor coordination, and arrogance led to disaster. The smaller but more disciplined Arab forces encircled and annihilated the Byzantine army. The defeat permanently shifted power in the region, opening the door to centuries of Islamic expansion.